Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to It's Your Time Now, a program dedicated to the ongoing struggle for true constitutional reform in Trinidad and Tobago. Since the show began, our sole objective has been to ultimately provide an understanding as to why there is such an urgent need for constitutional reform. In our quest to do so, we began by discussing where our current constitution came from and what it actually says. And we saw that it was during independence that Dr. Eric Williams made the decision that Trinidad and Tobago should adopt the British Constitution. And he is quoted as saying, and I quote, "After all, if the British Constitution is good enough for Great Britain, it should be good enough for Trinidad and Tobago," close quote. And that is why you would have heard so many of our guests talking about Trinidad following the Westminster model of government inherited from Britain. Having established the origins of our constitution, over the past months, as you know, we have been discussing what our constitution actually says, and with the help of numerous guests from all walks of life, we have been discussing how the constitution can be reformed by making it more relevant to our society today. In doing so, we have been discussing the basic structure of the state and the important powers of key office holders and their relationship to each other. Whilst it is our intention to continue educating the public on the current constitution and what it says, today I would also like to focus in greater detail on why there is such an urgent need for constitutional reform. It is no secret that for some time now, our population, regardless of color, creed, age, race, political affiliation, or gender, is on the whole unhappy or at the very least frustrated with the current state of affairs in Trinidad and Tobago. And as a people, we continue to have individual fears and concerns about crime, discrimination, the cost of living, the health service, education, the carnage on the roads, lack of job security, to name a few. But what is the root of all these concerns, and where do they stem from? If we are to be true to ourselves, the answer has always been and still is the poor quality of governance. And whilst it is not my intention to cast blame on any one administration, it is an undeniable fact that today our country is in a continuing downward spiral. So how did we find ourselves in this predicament, and what role can the Constitution play in providing a solution? The answer is simple. In layman terms, if the Constitution sets out the rules for the governmental and political arrangements which define how a country is run, it follows logically if the system of governance is not working, if the politics is not working, if the society is in chaos, if the country is experiencing poor governance, regardless of who is in power, surely the only solution would be to change those rules. But how do we begin doing that? Well, definitely not by politicians foisting on the nation what they believe to be the solution, as has historically happened, but instead by members of parliament going to their constituents to find out what their problems are so that the new rules, the new constitution would accurately reflect and address the real problems the citizenry are facing today. But there must be the political will to do so, because, unfortunately, our Constitution, as inherited from Great Britain in 1976, makes little or no provision for the involvement and/or participation of our people in the decisions that affect our lives. Because our Constitution, which was adopted almost wholesale from the days of our colonial past, follows a top-down approach, which takes us right back to where we started, which is where the power really lies in our system of government inherited from Great Britain. And that is, as we have illustrated time and time again, with the government of the day and not with the people. So is the current government serious about constitutional reform? That would in effect place the power in the people's hands and truly allow for a system of governance that will hold them accountable to the people once elected as promised in their 2010 manifesto. Well, on December 27, 2013, the People's Partnership published their report on constitutional reform after what has been described as having national consultation with the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But how many people actually participated? And more importantly, if we are to embark on something as important as constitutional reform, why have members of parliament in their roles as representatives of the people not gone to their constituents and listened to their problems in order to truly reflect their concerns? The answer comes back to the very problem we have been discussing with our current constitution. And that is, once a general election is held and the party winning the majority of seats forms the government, the people of the country no longer have a say. Power is taken out of the hands of the people and put in the hands of an all-powerful government that no one, including the parliament, has any control of. And herein is where the core of the problem lies and the desperate need for constitutional reform. As we saw last week during our discussions with the Member of Parliament for Lopino Bonaire West, the concept of representation has been in fact reversed, in that government MPs are to represent the government to voters and not the other way around. So how can the government ever know how the voters truly feel? To compound this, as we have seen in practice, members of parliament do not have much independence to actively agree with government policy. Indeed, a cabinet minister may be forced to resign simply for opposing one aspect of a government agenda, even though he agreed with the majority of other proposals. In the meantime, government backbenchers who are members of parliament of the ruling party, but who are neither in the cabinet nor state ministers, remains for all intents and purposes rubber stamps who must obey the parliamentary whip and the leader of government business with respect to how they vote. This means that even if an MP has a personal view on a matter, he must subsume that and follow the leader, for to do otherwise would be to commit political suicide. The system, therefore, in essence, only serves to further marginalize constituents because government MPs do not get the opportunity in Parliament to stand up and truly represent the interests of their respective constituencies. Therefore, if we are to have true representation through constitutional reform, critical issues such as the role of parliamentarians, the structure of the cabinet, dealing with the wide powers of the Prime Minister in the context of separation of powers, the protection of the rights of individuals in the minority, reform of the electoral system, amongst other things, must be put on the front burner by both major parties, the PNM and the PPP. To discuss this further, we have with us the Member of Parliament for Chaguanas West and Deputy Political Leader of the ILP, Mr. Jack Austin Warner. Welcome, Mr. Warner.
Thank you very much, Mickela. Thank you.
Welcome. So lovely to have you here. I know you have an extremely busy schedule, and thank you for taking the time out. Mr. Warner, let's get straight to it. You have been a member of the People's Partnership. So let me begin in the context of the introduction by asking you if you feel this current government is serious about constitutional reform.
Mickela, in the first case, I want to make it absolutely clear that the government carried out a charade, which they call consultation with the people for new constitution. It was never a true consultation. It was never done with the people per se. And moreover too, it was an expensive public relations aspect for a little more than $45 million. At the end of which, there was no draft constitution. It was merely a report.
It was merely a report.
So they spent $45 million for a report.
Yes, this report, in fact,
That's right.
if the public hasn't seen it, it's this report.
For $45.5 million.
I did not know that.
That's it.
I did not know that. I did not know
And
that.
when this happens, I've listened to you just now. Everything you say, you're right, because in a sense, this country does not have and never did have true parliamentary democracy. What we have had is prime ministerial autocracy. Even the parliament, everybody cows and bends down to the whims and fancies of the prime minister.
And on that point, I want to ask you, therefore, under the current system of government, similar, because you have been there,
Yep.
you have been there whilst in government. Under the current system of government, do you think the parliament, whether it's this government or other, can hold them to account when they make decisions that may not be in the people's interest? We have had a state of emergency, the Rashmi Ramnarayan issue, reneging on the pension promise, the more recent Arnold Roberts issue, and the argument with the COP. We had Mr. Lincoln Douglas, who was on here, who said that the COP had disagreed with that. And even more recently, the live sport program. So do you think, under this current system that we had, that we inherited from Britain, that the parliament can hold this government and or any government to account? And what was your experience when you were there?
But I go further. I do not think the parliament could hold anybody to account. It has never done that. And even when it tried, when it fired Vonnie, was on the wishes of the prime minister. The fact is, however, if we have a constitution that is made in heaven, and it is the best written constitution, unless the persons who implement the constitution and the persons who are put in the institutions of the constitution, like Auditor General, Ombudsman, and so on, that they function independently and they hold the office, because every one of them are depending on their office based on the largest form of the government. And therefore, in a real sense, in this country, what is saving us is the seeming independence of the DPP. Because everybody seems to be bending, and including the fourth estate, the media. They seem to be bending to the whims and fancies of the government. And to add to this, Mickela, on the one hand you have this, on the other side you have an apathetic population, most of whom are not bought, others have fallen asleep. Because if that weren't the case, Arnold Roberts wouldn't be a minister today. And that is where we are.
But do you think, Mr. Warner, that the population is battered, it's bruised, they're fed up? And I've spoken about this with previous guests. They feel that there is nothing that they can do. And even those who feel that there's something they can do, and I say this for this government and the previous PNM government, a lot of people in this country are afraid of victimization.
Yes, you are totally correct. Because the government is the biggest employer.
It is the biggest employer,
both directly
yes,
and indirectly. And you ask yourself, where are the chambers of commerce, for example? Where are these laudable institutions? Where they've all become mute. But the point is, when I walk the street and go in the market, I get a sense, a feeling, that if you didn't have elections in 9 months' time, this country would have had a revolution. I get that feeling. What has saved us and what is saving us as a nation is the fact that people are looking forward to 9-10 months' time for an election.
And you feel that there may be tactical voting, or there may be voting, or do you think that people may not actually even come out and vote?
They will vote.
You say they will vote?
They'll vote because they're angry. And they're angry inside.
So we will do the typical Trinidadian thing, and we will vote them out.
That's right.
As opposed to voting in, perhaps the best people to run the government.
And we are where we are because of the lack of constitutional reform.
Absolutely, Mr. Warner.
And don't think that any one of them, either in or out government, will go for constitutional reform. This is winner takes all.
But constitutional reform is what is really, it's what the Constitution is what protects the people. We need reform. The Constitution does not do that sufficiently right now. It is outdated, and therefore I myself did have some hope when I actually started to hear active discussion that there was going to be constitutional reform. But I have to say, I haven't gone to the first one. You were only allowed to speak for 3 minutes, and so I'm not sure where these ideas actually came from. But it didn't address very important issues such as accountability, which really leads me on to some statements that you have made recently.
Mm-hmm.
On the issue of accountability, you've been quoted as calling for investigations, and I know you've been doing that to the hilt, into the PM's Christmas Fund, the Children's Life Fund, a minister's purchase of a house in Hamilton, Canada, costing 800,000 Canadian, the purchase of a BMW, and all sorts. My question to you is, Mr. Warner, in the light of our discussion on the Constitution, without constitutional reform, how does the ILP intend to hold the government to account, given the government holds the majority?
By not losing hope, by going to the people, by using the institutions like our newspaper, Sunshine, to get it in the public domain, by using our radio programs, 91.9, 97.5, 102.1. We have programs on all these things weekly, daily, as the case may be, and also to by our public meetings. We believe that we have a very good chance, because we are neither fish nor fowl, and that we are, in a sense, media via. We are where the COP would have wanted to be. We are where the people were longing that the COP would have taken a stand. You know, Mickela, you know what has amazed me, if I may just digress a little? How can people who are seemingly independent in the cabinet of this government allow themselves to be so emasculated that they wouldn't even stand up for what is right? I can't understand it.
One of the discussions that we were having last week is that without constitutional reform, there are certain things that members of parliament, members of the cabinet can still do. And that is, they can stand up and voice their opinions. Because there is nothing in the Constitution which stops them from saying, listen, I don't think this is right. I think this is the way we should go. I had Mr. Lincoln Douglas, who was on, who in effect said to me, which was quite astonishing, he said to me, if you say anything, you can lose your ministry.
That's right.
And if you lose your ministry, and I said, well, what's wrong with losing your ministry? He says, well, then you can't provide services for your constituents.
That's not true.
Now, I know that has happened under the PNM. Is that continuing under this government,
if you lose your
Mr.
ministry,
Warner?
you lose your salary, you lose your perks,
I asked
you
him
lose your
that as
allowances
well.
and so
Yes,
on.
yes.
And these guys, they live on this. They thrive on that. I don't know how some of them will live 9 months from now, you know, when they're all out, as the vast majority of them will be, because they will not stand up for anything. And I tell you, I spent 3 years in the cabinet. 3 years in the cabinet. I swear to you, Mickela, some of them never opposed the Prime Minister once. And some of them hold top ministries today, top one. And after cabinet, they all mumble and grumble and so on, but they wouldn't stand up once to say zero, not once.
I know what you're saying is right, Mr. Warner, for the fact that a number of top cabinet ministers have contacted me.
But all right.
And not that I can do anything, but they've contacted me, and I said, guys, what you all doing? You know, listen, you got to stand up for something. Look at what's happening in the country. People are frustrated. And I never understood why, if people entrusted this faith and hope in you, that you wouldn't do the one thing you can, which is stand up. Now, Mr. Warner, a question. If someone is afraid to lose their job, as you've said, you can't be fired from being an MP.
No.
So you can you still hold the position. Is it purely
as I do?
As you have done,
Yeah.
but how is that now affecting you without you getting personally involved in the deliverance of goods and services? How does that affect you as somebody on the outside?
I moved from 45 to 50,000 a month to 14,000 a month.
Yes.
I moved from a driver and personal assistant and car and so on to nothing. But it didn't affect me because I didn't go in there for anything. And I'm still able to call ministers. Some of them are still, a few of them are still my friends. A few of them, but they can't be public at all.
So
right?
putting you aside, what is the effect on the constituents? Representation, the ability to represent the constituents, to provide for the constituents, without you doing it personally in your own personal capacity, does it become more difficult?
It becomes difficult. It becomes more difficult. It becomes sometimes overbearing. And there are some ministries, like the Ministry of Works and Infrastructure, with Sewage Rambuchan, who has sworn to give Chaguanas West nothing. So
but does Mr. Rambuchan understand that, and I mean, if the petty politics would stop for a second, does he understand that it is the people of Chaguanas West that is going to suffer?
No, he believes it's Jack Warner.
But you are not going to suffer, Mr. Warner. Politics will come and go, and you will have your life.
Right. That is correct.
But what happens to the people of Chaguanas?
I was in Ashraf yesterday, seeing some drains and so on that are being built for the people. I went there about 1:30 p.m. And they were shocked and so on because they saw me there. I walked through, talked with them, and they were all, of course, very loving and embracing and so on. And I told them, try to understand that I can't deliver for them as much as I would want to, and as quickly as I would want to, especially from the Ministry of Works and Infrastructure.
Okay, Mr.
I have
Warner.
nothing to ask ambition for, and they understand that. But you know what? They are still saying to me that, listen, when you were there, you were helpful.
And that's what I want to get back to, but we have to take a short break. We will be back in a couple of minutes. Please return in about 5-10 minutes. We look forward to seeing you.